Welcome to Sports Management Podcast, where you will hear interesting sports management professionals share their stories, experiences, and passion for the sports management industry. I am your host, Marcus Philipsson. Welcome to episode 168 of Sports Management Podcast. Today's guest is Olof Lundh, a Swedish award-winning journalist, reporter, columnist, podcaster, and an author. His latest book covers sports washing in general and the sports washing when Qatar was awarded the FIFA World Cup in particular. Olof is not afraid to ask the difficult questions and does not shy away from a controversial topic. We spoke about sports washing and why money talks, why he decided to write his latest book, if sports washing in women's sports is a necessary evil, the hypocrisy surrounding the topic of sports washing, sports and politics, and much more. Olof Lundh, welcome to Sports Management Podcast.
Thank you very much.
It's my great pleasure to have you here. For the Swedish audience, you are pretty well known, but for the global audience, can you give a little quick summary of who you are and what you do?
I am a journalist and an author who works for Sweden's biggest commercial TV channel, TV4, and I work as an editor-in-chief of their website, Fotbollskanalen, mainly focusing on football, and I also write columns in the daily business paper every other Friday in Dagens Industri, and I write some books and so on. So I've been working as a journalist for almost 30 years.
Yeah, and as I said, one of the top football journalists in Sweden and very well known. But if we start from the beginning, where did the interest for sports and journalism start?
Sports, I don't really know. I just had an interest when I was a kid, and I grew up in the 70s in Sweden, and that was a time when there was only state-run TV channel, two channels, and we didn't see that much sports, even though I grew up in the southern part of Sweden, so it was close to Denmark, so you got to see some games that way. But in a way, it was such a sports on TV. It was scarce, which meant that I almost saw everything. And it was the same with newspapers. I kind of read everything. And my interest for media and journalism comes from my father, he had two morning papers and a lot of magazines and books, and he always encouraged me to read papers and magazines and things like that. He said he didn't want to die curious, and I think that kind of spread to me too. So when I was younger, or when I grew up in Lund in southern Sweden, I always went to the library or different libraries because it's a university city. So there was more than one library, and I read a lot of papers, international papers, but also papers from all over Sweden. So the interest from media came from my father, and it kind of intersected with my interest in sports, because this was pre-internet. You couldn't get that much information if you wanted to know everything about football in England or NHL or whatever it was. So you had to really look for information in international papers and so on.
Yeah, interesting. And for the younger audience, maybe, they don't realize how it was before the internet. But you have, as you said, read a lot, studied a lot, bachelor in journalism and economics, also did very well on högskoleprovet. I don't know how to say that in English, but the test basically that summarized the bachelor's degree, you got top score on that one.
Yeah, I don't know how. It's kind of like an SAT or something like that that you have in the US, where you test different to get into college. Here in Sweden, you have it like your second chance. If you don't have good enough grades from going to school and you want to study something, you can get that chance to do this test that tests different stuff. And I did that, but that's a long time ago.
I understand that. As we said, you're covering many things, but during my vacations, I read your book, The Temple in the Desert, Templet i öknen. fantastic book that covers Qatar's involvement in the World Cup and how they got it and the bidding process and everything. So can you talk a little bit about why you wanted to write the book and the process until it was finished?
I was asked by a publisher if I didn't want to work with them. I've written 4 books before that about the Swedish top league and about Swedish football in general and the Swedish men's national team. And so I got a question from a publisher, and I said that, of course, I could write about the World Cup in Qatar and sports washing, because even though it takes Qatar as an example, I also kind of broaden it a little bit, at least the chapters in the end. And the reason is because I've been to Qatar a lot of times, because Sweden for a long time, actually from the late 80s until they just decided this year that they will cancel it, they always went abroad with players from the Nordic leagues to have a training camp and play some games. And they very often, sometimes they went to Thailand, they played the King's Cup, they also been to the US, but after that they decided they wanted to go to the Middle East because not that big time difference, good climate, and countries like Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, they've been to Abu Dhabi several times, and also Qatar, and they've been to Oman. They could give the Swedish Federation a pretty good deal to go there and play games. And I covered the national team, and that's when I started to know more about the region and the way it used sports and the way it used migrant workers and all those issues that the closer we got to the World Cup in Qatar 2022, the more inflamed these questions became. And they were like something people really discussed, and there were talks about boycotts and so on. And that's why I felt I had a really good grasp of this whole process, because it's been covered by a lot of journalists in different countries. But sometimes when you go back and you put together a story from A to Z, it becomes quite powerful to see the whole document. And also, I could show it out of a Swedish perspective, that Sweden had been to Qatar several times. And actually, at the end, the last time they went to Qatar, 2020, none of the other Nordic countries wanted to join them. Finland had been there in 2019, but they had a player who refused to go because of political reasons. And in 2020, Sweden paid Kosovo and Moldova, 2 of the probably poorest countries and poorest football federations in Europe, to send the national teams to play Sweden in Qatar. And then you get, it's fascinating in many perspectives. So that's why I kind of said to the publisher I could write this, and it was a real quick job, because I had most of the story in my head, not everything, but most of it. And so I wrote it from April to August in 2022, and then it was published at the end of September.
Sports washing, obviously, it's a big issue, and it's not black and white. It's difficult, going on a training camp. Does that mean that you support dictatorships? There are also several clubs in Europe, PSG, Chelsea, Newcastle, who was owned by different Saudi Arabian companies and so forth. And for example, in your case as a journalist, you are visiting these countries that also I know that you have gotten some criticism for. So how do you look at the whole sports washing issue in that sense?
In a sense, that's sports washing is one part of globalization, because of course I'm sitting here with an iPhone and probably manufactured in China. And should we trade with China, considering the way they lack of democracy and freedom of press and so on. And of course, there are a lot of problems with this. It's very hard to, if you draw a line in the sand, in 2 days, you'll probably end up discovering that, I can't draw a line here, because that will be difficult. I still think that if you're part of international organizations like UEFA, FIFA, the UN, and so on, you will be part of decisions that maybe you don't like, especially if you come from a democracy. But you've probably made the decision that it's better to be part of the UN or FIFA or IOC than not to be part of it, to try to affect these organizations, even though you're not successful. And if they decide that they are going to have the Olympics in Beijing or a World Cup in Qatar or in Saudi Arabia 2034, I think you should participate. But I don't think you need to go to these countries on a training camp. There are other parts in the world where you can go on a training camp and to show that at least we want to try to go to a country that's a democracy. I think that's one line in the sand that you can draw and that you can live after. And we've seen that in at least Nordic club football, that the supporters has been trying to most big clubs in football, they don't go to Dubai anymore for a training camp because their supporters don't like it or their members don't like it. They want them to, this is a club that certain values and we should respect certain things. Of course, there will be a player when they get the money from a player who moves to Qatar and Dubai. Most clubs and supporters and members will happily accept that. So it's there will always be problems. As a journalist, for me, I think you should go to try and show the other part. When it comes to Qatar, of course, I was in Qatar. I worked with the World Cup because TV4 broadcaster I work for, they had half the games of the World Cup, and you can say that they made money from it, and I'm part of that. But I also showed the other side. I tried during the World Cup, and I did before the World Cup, and I've extensively shown the other side of Qatar. And we actually, the only Swedish media that's gone back to Qatar 1 year on and see what happened after the World Cup. What's the legacy of the World Cup? We did the documentary that's actually nominated for an award in Best Investigative Reporting in the big TV gala Kristallen last week. It didn't win because the competition was really hard, but it showed that we and I, as a journalist, take responsibility in trying to show different parts of it and actually trying to ask questions to people who have taken these decisions. So for me, as a journalist, I think you should tell the story the best way you can, and that means you have to go there.
So talking about Qatar now with the legacy, because that was also the talk in Sochi and Beijing that it will be better afterwards. Do you feel like that's a valid argument now when we have had different mega events in these countries? Do you think that they come out better in terms of human rights and these issues?
I mean, when you take Russia and China, definitely not. And I think there was a naive opinion that sports will bring us together, as trade will bring us together. I mean, people were hopeful that if we trade with China, they will internet and all this new technology will make it difficult for the people who run the country to not to be able to control the population. Democracy will win, and it shows us now that that was naive and wrong, and trade doesn't bring us together. Neither does sports, unfortunately. And if you look at Qatar, I think the sports washers won, because for Qatar, I think the World Cup was a success. And in most countries, they only heard about the success. They didn't hear anything about migrant workers and the rights of LGBTQ persons and so on and so on. Maybe in 15, 20 countries, we talked about it during the World Cup. But afterwards, the debate, at least in Sweden, died almost a day after Lionel Messi and Argentina went home with a trophy. So unfortunately, I would say that the sports washers won, and that we have to understand that it's such a huge force. It's hard to fight it, but that doesn't change what you have to do as a journalist. At least try to tell these stories, try to show the world other parts, not only the sports, because that's important, even though you can get a little bit disillusioned when you look at the aftermath and the legacy of the Qatar World Cup.
So now you mentioned before also that the Saudi Arabia has bid for the 2034. So again, we have the issue of, how women are treated in Saudi and LGBTQ plus the community. We have players on the Swedish female national team, for example, who are in the LGBTQ community. And understandably, I guess that they don't feel very good about going to this type of countries.
No, but I mean, that's the way the world works. And one part of the book that I wrote, Temple in the Desert, was that I wanted to broaden the question, because should we say no to sports in Saudi Arabia, but we should trade with them, and that the pension funds of a lot of Swedes put money in Saudi Arabia or in Qatar? I mean, is that okay? I think we have to kind of broaden the question. Should we trade with these dictatorships? Apparently we should, because it seems like there's a political majority that we should do it, and the companies want to do it, and people want jobs. But then I don't think we can put higher pressure on sports personalities or athletes that they should you can't go to Saudi Arabia and compete, but we should sell our trucks and our cars and our technology. For me, that's I can't get that equation to. I can't solve that equation.
No, and I agree with you. As we said in the beginning, also it's a big question, and where do you draw the line? And one part of your book also, I think you said something along the lines that if could sports washing in women's sports, is that a necessary evil? So obviously money talks here, and women's football, for example, would probably be helped a lot by more funds. So should you then put a blind eye on the political aspect and accept those funds?
It's difficult, and it is fascinating that Manchester City often get plaudits because they have kind of put one social media account for both their women and their men's team, and then that the owners of the team are part of the ruling family of Abu Dhabi, and actually are some of the most powerful people in the United Arab Emirates, and women's freedom in that country is limited. So it's kind of like an irony or a paradox that their club is in the forefront in England, but in their own home country, they're on the back foot. And how should you as a player react to that? Should you say, I'm not going to play for a club like this? And many difficult questions, because of course in Sweden a couple of years ago, it was actually in November 2021, the team captain of Chelsea, Magdalena Eriksson, she wrote a column that she thought that the Swedish men, they were not outspoken enough about the problems with the World Cup in Qatar. This was when Sweden still could reach the World Cup in Qatar, and she said that since she's a homosexual and homosexuality is illegal in Qatar, she wouldn't go there. And she didn't like sports washing, but she failed to mention in the column that she at the time played for Chelsea, that was owned by Roman Abramovich, the Russian, who was one of the first sports washers in the world, who put a lot of money into Chelsea and made it possible for Magdalena Eriksson and a lot of other players to come to London and play for a great club and make good money, to be at least when you compare to other women's clubs. So that shows the difficulty of trying to be really clear in your message that this is what I do and this is what I'm not doing, and then suddenly you're entangled in something where it's very hard to move out of. And Magdalena Eriksson, after that, she moved to Bayern Munich, and at the time when she signed for Bayern Munich, they still had their deal with Qatar Airways and the Qatar airport in Doha, and which had been criticized by the club's member. It's been a huge issue. And before she started playing for the club, they had shelved Qatar, but they started working with Rwanda and Paul Kagame, another dictator, instead. So who's right, and can you even make a stand? And I like Magdalena Eriksson. She tries to make a stand, but it also shows how difficult it is to be really to draw this line. And I'm not stepping over this line.
Exactly. And we can go even deeper, as you said before, with the iPhones or the clothes that we wear, or, in Sweden, we are, as you said, doing business as a country with these countries.
And you and I are talking right now on Zoom. She's Chinese, and maybe we're being controlled by the Chinese government. I don't know. I mean, there are a lot of problems, but you have to keep on at least trying to show and these parts and talk about it. Talk about the challenges of globalization and all those problems that will follow you when you talk about it.
Yeah, because as you said before, like that your role as a journalist is to go to places and show how it actually is. That's a lot, but as you said, because it's very difficult to just draw this strict line and not go or not participate.
For me, I put a lot of thought into this because there were Swedish journalists and other journalists in other countries who said they wouldn't go to Qatar because that's where they drew a line in, and they wouldn't pass that. And so, of course, I thought a lot about it, but I kind of ended up in thinking that I had to go. If it was possible and my employer wanted me to go, I felt that I had to go, but also try to show something else than just the games and the party atmosphere in Doha. I had to show other parts, at least try. Maybe I didn't change that much, probably not, but for me, it was important. I think for the TV channel I worked for, it was also important that we didn't only show the games and concentrated on the sports, but we actually told stories about what happened outside of the pitches. Whether it was about Iranian people protesting the regime or people trying to bring in rainbow-colored things into the stands, or a lot of the local population or Arabs who brought in Palestine markers. In a way, they wanted to show their support for Palestine. And we tried to tell those stories too, and try to explain those stories too, just to show people that we were not only there to cover the games, which we of course did, but also told stories around the game of football.
You're not afraid to ask the tough questions and take up tough topics like this one. Is that always something, has that come natural to you, or is that something you have worked on? Because there was now you asked some question to the French coach, I think, for the national team, that then he bit back a little bit, and you're not afraid to, ask these hard questions.
Now, whether it's tough or hard, people always get annoyed when you use words like that. But no, I'm not that afraid, and I've actually never been afraid of asking questions. I'm curious. I'm still what my father put in me or taught me about being curious. That was the life you should live. So I've always been curious, and if you're curious, you ask questions, and I don't think that much before I ask the questions. I ask the questions I'm curious to get an answer from, and if people are annoyed by that, yeah, so let them be annoyed.
Do you get a lot of backlash for that on now with social media and the climate that can be on that platform?
I can definitely get a lot of backlash both on social media, but also emails, and people get annoyed with the questions that they don't sympathize with, and they think it's disrespectful to ask certain things, and so on. And of course, you can look at the press officers in the national team when you ask a player or the coach a question that you can feel that it's not appreciated. But I mean, I'm there because I want to ask questions for, in a way, for readers, viewers, listeners, and then not everyone will like my questions, but sometimes you don't really know what you're going to get from a question, and you have to ask different questions. I think that's part of being a journalist, to ask questions, and you're not there to become friends with the people you're asking questions.
So one person in Sweden, Zlatan Ibrahimovic, is one that's been, you hear it could be difficult to interview depending on his mood and where the conversation is going. How did you feel, or what was your attitude going into talking to him?
It's a very long time since I was one-on-one with him, because he doesn't do that many one-on-ones. And when my TV channel had the one-on-ones with him, I didn't do those interviews. Someone else did. Maybe because I didn't, I wouldn't have asked maybe the questions that others would have asked, and so on. But I didn't have that much of an attitude. The same there. I was curious about things, and then he got mad at me because of, usually it was something else that he was irritated with, something I'd written or something, and then he lashed out. But that's part of it. Sometimes people get annoyed with what you ask, but that's part of being a journalist.
Yeah. So you have mentioned curiosity a lot of times. So except for that, what drives you in your work, except for the curiosity?
That I think it's important to cover sports. Sports is something that a lot of people care about. A lot of people put a lot of money into it. And actually, in Sweden, the government, both on state level and regional level and local level, the government, the public puts a lot of money into sports, both directly through subsidies, but they also build stadiums and so on. So there are a lot of reasons that we should cover sports, and cover sports in a critical way, just as we cover politics or the environment or big companies and so on. I think that's one big part of it, and I think for a long time the focus was mostly on the sports, what happened on the pitch, what happened in the track, but the last maybe 15-20 years, people have started to look more outside of the pitch, or maybe looking at youth sports, or looking at how was this stadium actually funded, who made money from this, is building this stadium, and so on and so on. There are a lot of aspects that we try to kind of investigate, or try to give our view of, or ask questions. So I think that's really an important part, and it's part of a democratic society with a vibrant media covering this. Unfortunately, the media in most of the world, and also in Sweden, is under pressure because tech giants have taken a lot of the ad money. I mean, Google or Facebook and so on. They've taken a lot of the ad money from the traditional medias, and the evolution of the technology has made it people are not watching TV as they used to. They're not reading newspapers as they used to, which kind of killed the business model, which makes it difficult to get the people to pay for journalism, which is both sad and difficult, but you still have to try to make the best of it, to try. And I hope that people in the near future understand that media is important, and media is something that every democratic society needs to have, and that people are willing to pay for it. But I'm not certain that it will be that way. But I hope that that people will be willing to pay for it, because I think it's important that we have a working media in Sweden, whether it's politics or business or companies or whatever.
Yeah, maybe it's a different model that's needed. If you look at Spotify, for example, people were downloading a lot of music at, say, in the beginning of the 2000s, and then there was a new subscription model, and then now I would assume that the pirating of the music has gone down a lot. So maybe it's just the media houses need to find a different strategy of how to get paying customers.
Yeah, and that's Spotify is an interesting comparison. The problem with Spotify is that very few of the contributors or the artists are making a lot of money. I mean, everyone's making a little, but you have to be really huge. But maybe that's where we're heading, and then maybe it'll be tough for media in Sweden because we're a small country with just 10 million inhabitants or citizens, and maybe that market with this language is not big enough. It's not like The Athletic, which is an American startup from the beginning that started to cover local sports in the pro sports in the North America, and it's expanded to England. And of course, within English, the English language being such a huge language in the world, you can have a lot of people who pay. I mean, there will be people in Sweden who will pay to be part of subscribing on The Athletic because they want to follow their NHL team or their NFL team or the Premier League team and so on. So that's much harder for a Swedish media to create something that will get enough of scale to make money.
Yeah, definitely. It's a complex question for sure. Some final questions that I like to ask. Has there been any bumps on the road in your career? And if so, how have you overcome them?
Oh yeah, there's been bumps in the road in the beginning. It was very hard to get a job because there weren't that many jobs in the newspaper market because the shrinking has already started, and I moved around a little bit as being I took on shorter stints at the different papers, and before I got my first job, that was kind of a pressure, and now I understand for the media market is a lot tougher in 2024 than it was in the late 90s when I started out. So I understand that that's a bump, and you have to try to do your best and try to take the chances you get, and hope that you will that the hard work pays off. So that's a bump. I think quite a few will step into. If you're a new journalist, you won't. Very few will get a good job from the start. They will have jump around a little bit and try different media, and the media business is kind of hard. So I understand that is a challenge. That's a bump that most people will get into. And my other bump is that I did something I shouldn't have done. I did some freelance work for an agent in the football industry that in a way that I should have covered. And so after that, they didn't want me to work with sports at the paper I was working. And after that, TV4 asked me if I wanted to come to them. So that's what I did. But that was also a bump where kind of my credibility was hurt by me making the wrong decisions. And how did I overcome it? Yeah, I worked very hard to show that I could build up a credibility, and but I would say that hard work was the key to that, to getting past that bump. If you do something wrong, it's if you can get another chance, then you have to work really hard to deserve that chance, and that's what I've done.
As I understood it, also you owned up to that mistake. You didn't, make excuses or anything. You said, "I made a mistake. I will pay the price for this," and then continue to work hard.
Yeah, I did something wrong, and of course, then you have to own up to that.
Mm. You touched upon it a little bit, but do you have any advice for a young person who aspires to be a sports journalist?
Don't do it. Is the short one. Now, of course, you have to I think that if you're really passionate about something, then you can succeed, even though the odds are maybe not on your side, because you have to be honest about the media business. That it's, I mean, a lot of journalists have lost their jobs. The amount of posts at newspapers are a lot of fewer today than there were 5, 10, 15 years ago. So, I mean, there's still the state subsidized or state financed Sveriges Radio and Sveriges Television, the big TV channel and big radio station. They have still get a lot of money from our tax bill that they can use through a trust fund or some kind of a trust that finances. I mean, there will be jobs there, of course. So if you're really passionate, you really want to be a journalist, of course you can be a journalist. I think the key is that you're really, there's a fire in your belly in a way that I want to become a journalist. I'm really prepared to work really hard, and maybe I'm not going to work 38 hours or 36 hours this week. Maybe I need to work 50 hours. Right or wrong, that's reality. I mean, I can't sugarcoat the reality there is. But of course, and if you're really talented, maybe you will have an idea of a podcast or how to use AI to do sports journalism, or you maybe have to think outside of the regular box of a newspaper or a TV channel. How am I going to do sports journalism 2.0 or 3.0 or 4.0 in that sense? How do I reach the people who are really interested in sports? Because people are interested in sports. People are willing to pay, at least to watch sports. If they are willing to pay for journalism, I don't know. We'll find out. But if you do something really good, I'm certain that people will be willing to pay for it. And maybe you have the idea that I have this journalism that I will put in this shape or in this technology that will make people interested in paying for it. So, of course, there are possibilities, and you have to be curious. You have to be passionate. You have to willing to work really, really hard, and maybe also be creative in how do I reach the viewers, the listeners, the readers, the users, if you want to put them all in one word. How do I reach the users and make what I do relevant for them, and maybe make them willing to pay for it? That, I would say, is the key, to be able to have that some idea or something. Then I also think that there will always be a market for someone who's a really good columnist. If they go to a stadium and they kind of write in a way that it feels like you're in the stadium next to this columnist, and you feel the same smells, and you taste the coffee or feel the thuds of the tackles or whatever, there will always be a market for that. I'm certain of, but the market will be smaller than it was 10 years ago. And unfortunately, I think the market will be even smaller in 10 years. So you can't give up, and you have to be passionate. I know that now I sound like the Swedish national team coach, Jon Dahl Tomasson, who's from Denmark, who likes to speak English. He speaks a lot about passion also. And in a sense, I think that's a good word, because that's what you have to be able to make your mark on this market. And I think it's the same if you're a doctor and you do your PhD. You will not get paid for every hour. Or if you're a young lawyer who enters a law office of a big law firm, and you will not be paid for every hour that you put in, but maybe in 20 years you'll be partner and you'll be paid more than you should probably. So you have to have that drive, and where that drive comes from, yeah, that's up to you. But you have to have that drive that I want to be part of this. Otherwise, you will definitely not succeed.
Very interesting. So yeah, things will change for sure. But if you have passion, hard work, curiosity, and maybe some newness, new idea to come up with a new way in the future.
Thinking about the new ideas, how to present journalism will be key, to be creative and so on. And then you have to have the drive and the hard work ethics to be able to do it. But you have to have some kind of, how do I do this? Whether it's, how do I write it? How do I film it? How do I do an interview or so on?
There is some light in the tunnel, although there will be some difficulties ahead.
It's a very, very, it's not the strongest light at the end of the tunnel. I have to be honest. I don't like sugarcoating. I like to be honest.
You're a straight shooter. We know that. Anything else, Olof, before we sign off here that you would like to mention?
No, I'm fine. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Olof Lundh, thank you for being on Sports Management Podcast. Thank you for listening to the Sports Management Podcast. Please hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out on any upcoming episodes. Also, feel free to leave a comment about what you thought about this episode. If you want to get in contact with me, send an email to sportsmpodcast@gmail.com or hit me up on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram @sportsmpodcast.